Joining me on the latest episode of the Gray Area Podcast, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports and also the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts for free. I am joined by author and NBA writer for Bleacher Report. His new book, Built to Lose, comes out on May 4th, 2021. You can follow him on Twitter at Jake L. Fischer. His name is Jake Fischer. Jake, how are you today?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I appreciate you taking the time with me, jumping on here before another NBA season starts here in the next 15 days or so. Kind of hard to believe that, we got another NBA season on the horizon here. What have you thought about the offseason just as a whole with respect to how everything has happened with the shortened timeline and how the NBA is now getting ready for a new NBA season all of a sudden?
The shortened timeline is a huge thing. I mean, typically the season ends in June. We have free agency. We have the draft at the end of June. We have free agency first week of July, summer league, and then we kind of go away for 2 months. Everyone takes their overseas trips in August and September, and then we're back. We had to squeeze a 4-month offseason into like basically 6 weeks. And I'm really curious how that's going to impact not just players physically, having to rush back and getting into physical activity, but these coaching staffs, these front offices too. I mean, they've just had their foot to the gas for a long time here. Where you might see some burnout at a certain point, kind of like a rookie wall for most rookies in the NBA.
Yeah.
All across the board. And I'm kind of curious if we hit that wall and when that happens.
It's interesting. You talked about the compressed timeline that these teams and franchises are having to go through. How do you anticipate these teams will manage and adjust to all this, given not only the compressed timeline, but dealing now not being in the bubble and dealing with obviously what will be positive COVID tests as this season goes on and how they decide to manage that?
I think we're going to end up seeing, well, I guess behind the scenes, we'll find out there's going to be a lot less time. Sorry about that. There's going to be a lot less time behind the scenes to actually get practices, right? Like there isn't going to be a lot of 5-on-5 scrimmaging once the season gets playing. So I think what we'll see, hopefully, is a lot of guys really well rested. And I think we're going to see some shooting numbers potentially up across the board this year, because I think a lot of practices are going to end up being very heavily based on shooting. Obviously, as the league continues to trend more and more in that direction, just in general in terms of offensive output, I think it's also a great way to keep guys fresh without putting a lot of wear and tear in their bodies in practice. And I think we're going to see a lot of the coaches, the smart coaches, they're going to use the actual games to mix and match lineups and see what they have out there as opposed to doing that in practice. So we might really I think we're going to see a lot of fan bases complaining about not having a typical rotation or stuff like that. The classic fan griping.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be widespread across the board here.
And that fan griping will take place much more over Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram and other places because there won't be fans for the most part in these NBA arenas. And as you start to kind of preview the NBA season, of course, I'm down here in Dallas, and we think we have one of the best young stars in the NBA in Luka Doncic. What have you made about him as a player and how he has continued to develop his game now going into his third season in the NBA?
I know this could sound hyperbolic, but Luka's trending to being one of the greatest players of all time in terms of talent. I mean, the jury's obviously out on winning in the postseason and what his playing style, his leadership style, his personality type, what that does in a team environment in the playoffs. Obviously, he's only been there once. He's super young. But no matter what, if you step aside from the rings conversation and comparing guys' playoff records and all that, what he does in the court, just being able to manipulate an entire game, all 10 people, all 3 referees, the entire coaching staffs on both sides, it's a generational type talent we're watching, and you guys are really, really lucky to have him.
Yeah, first team All-NBA selection last year at just 21 years of age, going into his third season with this Mavericks team. And you start to see the development of this young core with him and Kristaps Porzingis. Do you think this duo could become one of the best young duos in the NBA for years to come, given Kristaps Porzingis' health, if it continues to hopefully continue to improve as it goes on?
That's the big question, right? If he can be healthy, which unfortunately we haven't seen yet. And it's a thing that a lot of scouts in the league start to talk about when you look at players like Bol Bol another like 7'1", 7'2" long athletes. Kristaps Porzingis, unfortunately, right now, if he's the archetype of that type player, it's not someone that's been able to stay on the court for long periods of time. And he's really only done it 1 year in his career. But when he did that, he was an all-star. So that being said, if he is healthy, especially like we just talked about at the top, with three-point shooting being more prevalent these days, it's to have a 7'3" guy who can run around the back line of your defense and be a vicious rim protector and also be a pick and pop guy for Luka to give him space and give another, threat to throw the ball off those high screen actions and have Luka maybe even move off ball. It could be a dangerous pairing for a long, long time.
Yeah, that's what a lot of Mavs fans are hoping for a long time with respect to these two young players. It's interesting because that conversation about Porzingis kind of transitions me a little bit before we come back to some more NBA season preview of the Mavericks a little bit. Obviously, your book, Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever, coming out May 4th in 2021. And some of this has to do with how teams have continued to reshape themselves given, obviously the most prevalent one that we think about is the trust the process with Sam Hinkie and what they did in Philadelphia and all of that. But you have some really interesting information about how things went down with respect to Kristaps Porzingis in 2015 when he was drafted by the New York Knicks. Knicks fans much maligned the pick with Phil Jackson there running basketball operations. Talk about how some of that melds into your book and what you're trying to get accomplished with this book here.
Yeah, so I really wanted to do a full anecdotal history and a kind of nonfiction narrative storytelling of that era because it wasn't just Philly. The same draft Philly traded Drew Holiday to kind of restart that rebuild. Boston also traded Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce to Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
And that summer before, Orlando and Phoenix moved off of Dwight Howard and Steve Nash. And there was this rise of an analytical-minded executive, Sam Hinkie in Philly, Ryan McDonough from Boston to Phoenix, Rob Hennigan in Orlando, and Boston themselves. All four of those teams were recognizing that the 2014 draft was supposed to be this next 2003 type draft. And instead of competing against LeBron while him and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh were running the league in Miami, why not be bad on purpose, get those next type of guys like them, and when theoretically their prime is over, you can rise up and take their spot, right?
Yeah.
So one of the players who was supposed to be in that 2014 draft was Kristaps Porzingis. And the Orlando Magic, they had the number 4 pick, which they used on Aaron Gordon, and they had the number 12 pick, which ended up they took Dario Saric and traded him to Orlando. But at the time, before Porzingis got out of that draft and withdrew his name, he would have gone to Orlando. The Magic absolutely promised him. And then the next year, when he does enter in 2015, he has another really great year in Spain. The Magic are upholding their promise for a whole year. They're going into the lottery praying they'll be high enough to get Kristaps Porzingis. Sure enough, they fell to 5. Porzingis' representation refused to let him work out, visit, talk to anyone with the Sixers. They got a promise from Phil Jackson at number 4. That's what led Kristaps to New York and ultimately obviously set up that trade for him to get to Dallas.
Wow. Now, that's the first time that I've heard those intimate details of Orlando being the team that was going to originally. What was Orlando's affinity with Porzingis? Yeah, what was their affinity with Porzingis that they were willing to make such a promise to him like that?
Well, number one, the Oklahoma City Thunder under Sam Presti, they just did it this year. I'm going to butcher the kid's pronunciation, but Poku is the nickname. The guy that they traded up to draft, always linked to be promised to the Thunder. Josh Eustace was linked to be promised to the Thunder. It's a thing the Thunder do. So I think, first of all, Rob Hennigan coming from that front office, that's where he got that strategy to say to a guy, hey, we like you. We want you in our building. If you're still available, we're going to take you at this number. I also just think they were trying to do what the Thunder did, obviously, with stacking young talent, Kevin Durant, also Westbrook, James Harden. They also drafted Serge Ibaka right in that tier as well. I think they were trying to add long athletes who could shoot, who could be versatile, who could be malleable, who could play multiple different positions, and just kind of have them all grow together and see what happened, just like in OKC. Kristaps Porzingis could have been one of those players that helped the front line of that rotation, and ultimately maybe he would have been running a pick and roll with Victor Oladipo in Orlando and throwing lobs to Aaron Gordon cutting on the baseline. It's kind of funny how like much NBA history really comes down to just a lottery position jockeying or one team trading up over another. Because the book starts off also in 2013 involving Dallas too. The Atlanta Hawks were really, really, really trying to trade up to get Giannis Antetokounmpo. And they knew that the Milwaukee Bucks picking at 15 were going to take him. At 14, the Utah Jazz had already been involved in a trade. At number 13, the Mavericks had the 13th pick. And the Hawks were trying to trade number 17 and number 18 in that draft to get number 13 from Dallas.
Yeah.
The summer, Dallas was trying to save all this cap room to move forward for free agency, back in the Dwight Howard times, and they tried to get Chris Paul, and they tried to get LeBron, and they tried to get Carmelo. They were not looking to get on more guaranteed money in those future in those 2013 first round picks. So instead, Dallas traded 13, which was Kelly Olynyk, to Boston for second round picks that wouldn't be on the cap until later on. The Celtics trade up and take Olynyk. 14 is, I think, Shabazz Muhammad. 15 is Giannis Antetokounmpo on the Hawks.
Which is funny that you bring that up, because a lot of the talk down here in Dallas, currently is the idea that Giannis would be a perfect complement to Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis, and the relationship that Donnie Nelson and this organization have had with those folks would be a perfect fit. But to think that they could have potentially taken him at the time and didn't, and now how all of that has shaped up since, that's a really fascinating story. Those are details that I think as folks read this book will start to find that how, and you mentioned it, how NBA history is shaped by a move here or a move there that did or did not happen. And next thing you know, things work out the way that they do. I'm sure Giannis would say it worked out for him okay. Yes. He's, a two-time league MVP at this point. As you were going through your research and going through your player and executive interviews and the hundreds of interviews that you did, what did you find was the common thread about these individuals and how they go about this particular way of building teams and rosters, given how that has changed the landscape of the NBA the last several years?
It's really interesting how at a certain point in the last decade or so, there's been a huge overlap to me between the NBA and big tech. And we see rival front offices now, coaches, players, everyone's trying to do something that's going to give them an advantage. Not just trying to get better. They're trying to do something that's going to give them an advantage over their competition. That's a big difference, right?
Yeah.
And so we see these front offices trying to unfold or just create different new analytical metrics to compare prospects, or they try to, see this guy in Antarctica who, the average scout isn't going to go see. And it's really interesting to see not only how teams try to, add to that list of things they're doing, but also other teams are trying to all they're trying to do is be more efficient. They're trying to see more info, get more data, talk to more people with doing in the least amount of time so they can get there's different approaches. And I think it's really fascinating. I tried to kind of interweave the stories of all those different franchises and their strategies and their thinking at different pivot points to kind of showcase how there isn't a one-size-fit-all approach at all to building, a sustainable team. And you look across the board, like at the top of the standings right now, like the Lakers, they just got lucky because they got LeBron. Like that's what it comes down to. And they got lucky that at a certain point, he didn't care about their front office in the past. All he wanted to do was play in Los Angeles. Anthony Davis comes, they're LA. But, in Philly, it's a huge market. Number 4, number 5, whatever in the country. And they still struggle forever to get free agents. Their new owners come in, Joshua Harris, David Blitzer and company. They really want to create, a winner. They pushed those old champion Celtics in 2012 to Game 7 in the second round. They go and trade for Andrew Bynum. He's the missing piece. Bynum then gets hurt, misses the whole season, and the Sixers decide to go reverse course and implode with Sam Hinkie. And the only reason why they're good right now is because of Sam Hinkie, even though owners fired him essentially and pulled the rug out from his timeline and did the exact opposite of his approach. So it's interesting to see how not only franchises, like we were saying at the top, they try these new strategies, they try to get these advantages. Sometimes they can't even stick to the plan and the strategy that they were, carrying out. It's not just Philly, it's everywhere. And there's external pressures from people around the league, from the league office, from your fans, from trying to beat the team next to you. That's just the NBA is so much bigger than the 48 minutes of basketball that happened between those painted lines. So that's kind of what the book is focused on, just finding out what happened behind those, locker room doors, front office doors, war room doors, at a dinner between the front office and a head coaching candidate in Las Vegas, to try to find out like the heartbeat of what influences these people to make these decisions that ultimately impact fans and what roster they're watching on the court.
And you started to allude to some of it, because I think one of the things that folks, I would imagine, in Philadelphia were most upset about, and other teams who have done it, is that you're putting fans through years of losing and embarrassment just for the idea and promise that you could potentially win games down the road. And it's different with the NBA because you have the lottery. Just because you have the worst record in the league, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the number one overall pick. How did you find that teams manage those things, given the lottery itself and how that looks to fans and others who, really support these teams, given what they use in their hard-earned money to watch these teams play night in and night out?
For sure. And I really focused on it in the book, showcasing the Philadelphia fan base and how they really kind of rallied around Hinkie and made like him their deity and kind of a demagogue of sorts. And it kind of goes to show that a lot of teams, a lot of fan bases, they will support an actual concerted effort to build something sustainable that has an actual chance to win a title. Because as Mavericks fans can attest, it's pretty frustrating, if you just get there and then you're never there again, right? That the fact that 2011 team never got back is something that I know a lot of Mavericks fans still complain about to this day. Yeah. And that's a complete, course correction from what they were trying to do right before they won that title. They were buying. Let's add to Dirk. Let's bring in Tyson. Let's bring Jason Kidd back. And they immediately switched courses right there. And I think what it comes down to is fans, they will trust and appreciate an actual plan and an actual motivated task if there's a concerted goal at the end of it. And Phoenix labeled it very plainly when they were doing it at the same time as Philly, starting in 2013. They got 3 first-round picks in that 2014 draft, which was basically unheard of at the time. Those first-round picks started having their valuations peak even higher than ever, because Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parker and Joel Embiid were all considered to be the LeBrons, the Chris Bosh's, the Dwayne Wades. Yeah. And they were very bald about it from the beginning. Boston was telling – I remember Danny Ainge's press conference was basically telling the fans, like, this is not for the faint of heart type thing. There are these veiled ways to convey it, and I think – fans appreciate when there's an actual effort being taken and not just trying to make the playoffs as an 8 seed to try to get, some gate money for your ownership's pockets. Like, I think people actually appreciate what it takes to build a sustainable winner in the league.
Yeah, no, that'll be fascinating to see all those details come out as they do once the book comes out. That's good stuff there. And as you look into this NBA season, a much anticipated one, obviously, not just with the compressed timeline, but also a lot of movement. Your man James Harden still hasn't shown up in Houston yet, apparently, as we're talking about this.
He still wants to get traded if there's any confusion about that.
That he wants out of Houston. Before we move on, what do you think about how he is going about his quote-unquote strategy to appear to try to get out of Houston, given Russell Westbrook's already moved on to Washington, and what's going on with Houston down there?
Obviously, it's like pretty jarring and not normal in the NBA, but we kind of see this happen in the NFL every year, right? Guys hold out for weeks at a time. Le'Veon Bell did it for half the season. That's not what I think is going to happen here, but I mean – I don't want to keep going back to the book, but one thing I think came about from that is I realized, and it's kind of like the central thesis, is that tanking played a factor in how and really steering this player empowerment era to being even more so what it was. If teams were so willing to be bad for multiple years, like we were talking about, just to get you, that kind of plays a factor in you thinking, wow, I'm James Harden. Like, this franchise is nothing without me. He's right. So it's hard to blame him. It's hard to blame him if he doesn't want to be there. He swings the biggest stick in the room, like he drops the heaviest hammer. So it's hard to blame what he's doing. That's my answer.
We'll see if he gets his way. And you start looking at the tops of the East and the Western Conference. Obviously, the Lakers sit there at the top. The Clippers and other teams there in the East. You still have the Milwaukee Bucks sitting there as the prohibitive favorite to come out of the East. What have you thought about how both the East and the West look, given and being relative to what they finished out last year? Obviously, with the Lakers being champions.
Relative to last year, I think the Lakers are now in their own tier ahead of everybody else in the West. What they did this offseason to bring in Marcus Hall and Dennis Schroeder, the Wesley Matthews signing was like a stealth little thing. And Montrezl Harrell obviously stealing him from the Clippers. It's what they were able to do. It's impressive. And, Rob Pelinka got a lot of flack at the beginning of his career. I gave him some of it for, little cap things here and there that they kind of messed up. But I would give him my Executive of the Year vote for sure. And I think on the Eastern side of things, I think all those teams up top got better. And, Boston losing Gordon Hayward is obviously a bit of a loss. But at a certain point when they were healthy, I think they kind of struggled in finding the right minutes for guys because they had so many talented bodies who were kind of the same size and did different things on the perimeter, which, you can never have too many wings in this league. But at a certain point, Boston did. And when everyone's healthy, obviously. And so I think losing Hayward might be addition by subtraction for them, just because also it allows Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to take one step forward, not just on the court, but, as personalities in that locker room. And Hayward was a pretty steady voice that, a lot of people respect his dedication and his professionalism and all that stuff. So I think that opens the door for a different type of era now in Boston. And I think what Philly did behind Daryl Morey, and he's only going to keep moving. That's Daryl's MO, right? That your roster isn't final until it has to be. I like, the small moves Miami made and mostly, bringing everybody back together. Milwaukee, that's the one question mark. And what I think they really did at the end of the day could set them back moving forward in terms of limiting their flexibility. And they might be a thinner team than they were, and that they might actually only be worse than what they were last year when it comes to the postseason, because I don't think their moves address their biggest issues. Drew Holiday is not a half-court creator like they need. He's a phenomenal player, and I think he'll be really excellent around Giannis, especially in transition, especially in the regular season when they're catching a team on third night, second game in 3 nights, and they're just galloping in the front court, and Drew's spotting off Giannis, bringing the ball up. That'll be great. But in the fourth quarter, it's cliche, but in the fourth quarter when the game slows down and they need to get a bucket out of nothing, I'm not so sure Drew Holiday is the guy that really is going to push the needle there. So I like what everyone else at the top of the East pretty much did, aside from Milwaukee. We'll see where that makes things fall. But at this point, I think you have to give it back to the Heat again, because they only got better. Their guys, they only doubled down on what they had. Their guys at their core, and their young guys are only going to get better. I think we're going to see the Heat take another step forward this year, and they might really cement themselves as the team to beat in the East.
Yeah, they're the one team to me that their identity is forged around not just their star in Jimmy Butler, but Eric Spoelstra, to me, I thought should have won Coach of the Year last year. But at the same time, he has been a constant force there that I think he's still, even after winning a couple of championships, still probably the most underrated coach in all of the NBA, just given how talented he has been over the last,
He's a stud. And he just finds guys. Everyone was falling in love, with Duncan Robinson and his story. Kendrick Nunn at the beginning of the year was this huge story that he was the Rookie of the Year front runner, and he had been in the D-League, yada, yada, yada. They're going to find somebody else. We got bigger rosters this year. Yeah. They're going to find some player also. It's not done. Eric Spoelstra is going to take some guy who was in the D-League or some guy who was in Lithuania last year, and in the first round, he's going to have a big playoff moment. And Mike Breen's going to be saying, another guy that Eric Spoelstra, just watch. It's going to happen.
Yeah, and of course they re-upped with Bam Adebayo on a max deal, so he's going to be around for a long time there too. Before we get you out of here, what do you think about the Mavs? Do the Dallas Mavericks find themselves in a position with some of the moves that they made with Josh Richardson acquiring him, James Johnson, and others? Do you see that they have the potential to crack the top four of the Western Conference this year, given what they have obviously with Luka Doncic there as their star?
Just like we said with Harden a couple minutes ago, as long as they have Luka in place, they've got a shot for sure. And KP's health obviously is a big question mark, but I do like the Richardson addition. I think that, I mean, as great as Seth was with you guys, I think that trade will benefit both Richardson and Curry. Just being in their new spots, I think Curry's going to be really, really dangerous off of Ben Simmons, just like he was with Luka. And I think Josh Richardson is going to be very, very crucial for that defense, the top on the perimeter, top Carlisle's attack, because we know Luka's not, going to be guarding or not really doesn't have any interest to be guarding opposing point guards for 48 minutes.
Right.
So that's going to be a big factor there too. Same with the rookie Green. And I think every kudos you just gave to Eric Spoelstra applies to Carlisle too. I mean, the greatest offense ever, obviously last year. Whenever I spent some time in Dallas throughout the last couple of years, whenever I fly down there, not happening this year, obviously.
Right.
But, just even in his typical scrum, I mean, he's just a genius about basketball. And I think getting Powell back, and I also think Jalen Brunson is a huge piece for that Dallas team that he wasn't there a large portion of last season. And I'm a big fan of what they're building, and I think everybody. I think there's obviously the youth and the injury question marks, but Dallas is for real, and there's nobody in the Western Conference who wants to see them on the other side of the court. It's a real legitimate thing brewing down there.
Yeah, we think that there's a chance that a championship window could be open for quite some time, given how good Luka Doncic is and what they are building around him. They seem committed to doing that. Jake, tell the folks what you're working on currently right now, obviously in the midst of preparing for this season, but I'm sure a lot of things are happening over there with the Bleacher Report folks and obviously with the book continuing to come out as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I'll be able to go to Brooklyn Nets games, depending on, the COVID stuff. I don't want to gloss over it, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And Built to Lose is coming out on May 4th, so you can pre-order that anywhere you can pre-order a book. And yeah, I'll be covering the league for Bleacher this year, just kind of taking a step back and doing some feature reporting on kind of just like we talked about with the book, the relationships and the different personality traits that kind of keep these guys going and bring these locker rooms together. And I think it's going to be a pretty interesting year, being that there's a lot of teams who have a shot, just like last season. And I think this format is going to potentially create some margin for error. That's going to allow some teams to sneak up, some teams to fall. And I'm trying to cover this league this season through that lens of expecting there to be unexpected things.
Yeah, no, it should be a wild and exciting season given what has happened, not only preseason so far, but also what happened in the bubble in Orlando and teams ready to go yet again. The book is called Built to Lose: How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. It comes out May 4th, 2021. You can find him on Twitter at Jake L. Fischer. NBA reporter for Bleacher Report, Jake Fischer. Thank you so much for the time, Jake. Really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun, and can't wait to get a hands on the book, and looking forward to it. So I appreciate you taking the time with me today.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for having me.
Thanks.